When so many first-person shooters have found themselves fixated on the distant future with jetpacks, human augmentation, fancy suits of armour, DICE have gone in the other direction. In fact, they went further back than most developers would have even considered. When you think of the First World War, it's the trenches of the Western Front and the endless churn of casualties and death that you think of. The trench foot, the gas, the shelling, the sheer devastation. That's what you get in the powerful prologue mission as you hop from one body to the next, dying time and again in a uniquely presented depiction of war on the Western Front. I spoke about this last week, optimistic that the rest of the single-player campaign could evoke similar feelings. And it can do, at times. 5 distinct and separate episodes follow this one, but these follow a single fighter in the war, whether it's a tank driver, a rapscallion pilot, or an old dogged Australian. Each presents its story in slightly different ways, and there's a certain inventiveness to their approaches to this, but they're all trying to pull on their heartstrings. Unfortunately, while there's variety there and fairly free-formed level design that lets you tackle things as you see fit, it never hits as hard as those first 15 minutes. I never really felt like I was fighting in a group of soldiers, for example, with AI buddies always seeming to spawn in just behind me once I'd finished doing all of the hard work. And the enemy AI is just a little bit dumb, happily charging at a tank with a rifle or running back and forth while completely ignoring me. But the single player does have its moments, there's absolutely no doubting that, and it's a much improved campaign over the last couple of mainline Battlefield games. I just wish that they could have gone that little bit further. Taking those extra steps is left for the multiplayer. The overall feeling will still feel quite familiar for fans of Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, but the new setting allows for a lot of changes to be made and fresh ideas to be introduced into the mix. So you still have 4 main classes, but the Assault has taken over tank killing duties and has to have a much closer range, while the Engineer has then been replaced by a separate medic class, just as in very, very old Battlefield games. If you've not paid attention to the alpha and beta tests, it will surprise you just how many automatic guns there are, considering what we're taught about in secondary school. With a number of different SMGs or LMGs to choose from in 2 of the classes, the medic is then restricted to the semi-automatic or bolt-loading weapons, and the same is true of the scout class. Most of these guns will also have you aiming down iron sights, with scopes then reserved for actual sniping duties. Just because the weapons are more primitive than their modern counterparts in Battlefield 4, that doesn't make them any less effective. In fact, the average time to kill might even be a little bit shorter if you manage to land all of your shots. You've also got plenty of crossover with Battlefield 4's gadgets. Yes, there's still the mortars for the support class, which can be so annoying when you're on the receiving end, but also so gratifying when you get it right. Being the First World War, you've got gas grenades, and they are something that can be really quite annoying when you have to pull out your gas mask and that stops you then aiming down sights through the smog. They're a good, if annoying, tactical option, but interestingly, you don't have to unlock them. They're there for you right from the off. Vehicles feel like they're a much rarer sight in general, but because of that, they can really be there to turn the tide of the battle. Spawning in on a plane or a tank, you'll be given a bespoke pilot or tanker class with their own particular weapons, and that prevents you from using these just to get to your favourite sniping spot, or just crash it into the sea or whatever. Tanks are perhaps the more desirable of these though, because destroying a tank takes a lot of concentration and coordination from the other team. The Assault class is by far the best to equip to do this, but even then you'll need a couple of lives and lots of ammunition or several different players working together in order to do so. Those vehicles are nothing compared to the Behemoths though. These are like the AT-AT walkers from Star Wars Battlefront, but in 3 different types. You've got the airship, which we've seen hovering over the skies of the Alpha. You've got the armoured train, which I think appeared in the beta, and there's also the battleship. They take a long time and a lot of damage to kill, and during that time they've got huge, devastating weapons, and they can really turn the tide of a battle. It's because of this power that they're only gifted to teams that are losing really quite badly in Conquest, or when the attackers lose a round in the new operations mode and they have to use a second battalion, or a second life if you will, in order to keep fighting. Operations takes Conquest and Rush, both of which are still in this game, and brings them together into something that's even bigger than anything that's gone before in the series. With 2 teams of 32, one of the sides is trying to capture and hold up to 3 separate control points in order to take a sector and move on to the next. But you have to do this half a dozen times in order to actually win a match or a campaign. And each operations campaign occurs across 2 or 3 maps, which are tied together in a loose story from the First World War. So the attackers have got 3 battalions, or lives, in order to win a campaign, picking up from the sector that they couldn't capture before and having a Behemoth to back them up. They're just so hugely powerful, and they can feel very, very unbalanced in this particular situation because of the lack of vehicles that the defenders generally have in this mode. But I think it kind of works out. A bigger concern is just how draining it is to potentially spend over an hour on the defensive side of things fighting this grim and bitter rearguard action, only to face these implacable war machines a couple of times and just feel utterly hopeless. That's even worse when you're playing solo or with a squad of random people who you don't know and they aren't working well together. So you really want to get a group of friends and play as a squad, just as in any Battlefield game. It's at that point that all of this kind of clicks and it comes together, as opposed to feeling a bit lonely and left out. Rush, in contrast to Operations, hasn't been as improved. You don't get the help in clearing a captured area, which you do in Operations, where it marks all of the enemy players still in the sector and encourages you to basically hunt them down. And there's also some questionably close objective placement that I feel should be reconsidered. I get that they need to be closer because of the 24 player limit, as opposed to the Operations having 64, but with 2 of the telegraph boxes in adjacent rooms in a tunnel on one particular map, it can be a bit too close and a bit too claustrophobic and easy to defend. So now there's 3 core game modes in the game, but there's also some alongside this. You've got the foot soldier only domination, you've got team deathmatch, and there's the surprisingly fun war pigeons. It's difficult not to sing stop the pigeon as you run around a map hunting for pigeon coups and then try to avoid enemies while scribbling a message and get them away safely. There's then the despair when it's shot out of the sky, or the glee when you manage to call in an artillery barrage, but all semblance of the tactical play kind of goes out of the window in this dumb but fun mode. And the same is true of the first of DICE's temporary experiments, with the custom game mode Fog of War shrouding the map in fog, removing the HUD and any friendly player markers, and then sending you off into the woods with just a pistol and your gadgets. Fog is just one of the many possible weather effects that can roll in and change the atmosphere of a battle, and the game feels different when it's chucking it down with rain, but fog and sandstorms can really limit how far you can see, how much you can hear, even though snipers do feel like they can still pick you off at a distance sometimes. It's a big part of what makes the game look so fantastic, having this weather effects, but all of the maps look absolutely wonderful regardless. There's one set in the Argonne Forest in France that we called Endor countless times, but there's also simply gorgeous maps in the Alps, in the Middle East, even in the shelled ruins of a French city. You'll also notice that some of these maps have been used during the more open levels in the single-player campaign, and they do manage to hold up quite well in that context. With the new setting and all it brings with it, Battlefield 1 gets a thumbs up from me. I just wish that the single player had been able to push on and draw more from that excellent opening. There's still this good step forward with the multiplayer though. You've got the new classes, the wielding of very old guns, the more scarce but more powerful vehicles, behemoths, and of course the operations mode, which is a particular highlight. You'll want to head over to thesectaxis.com for our scored review, but that is it for this particular video. We've got a couple of other things on Battlefield 1, including a dedicated look at the early glimpse of the single player, operations mode, and what I think is possibly the best gun in the game. So if you like the sound of that, there's a thumbs up button for you to click, and there's a subscribe button for you to click on as well to get more of this kind of video. And with that, I bid you adieu.